fear is not our friend. And so, fear keeps you from seeing the beauty that's on the other side. And so, you could go up on that plane and say, man, I'm sorry, I can't do it. And you ride the plane back.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Particle Accelerator podcast, where we talk to future thinking business leaders about how to accelerate their business and grow their team. I'm here with Bill Nye. Bill, why don't you introduce yourself?
Good morning, and thank you for having me. So I'm the Chief Executive Officer for a company out of Crown Point, Indiana called Bayshore Properties. We've been around for about 20 years. Our bread and butter is investing in multifamily real estate. It's a great place to put your money for sure. Has been for a very long time, and so I've been doing this for 30 years, and it's one of those things. Once you get into it, you're just kind of trapped into it, and I've made my life now over the last 30 years. Didn't plan on going that route, but that's what happened.
Oh, cool. I'm super excited about this topic. My wife and I are wannabe real estate investors. We have a couple rental properties, and so it'll be exciting to get into that and see how that game is changing and how you're adapting to that. Let me get to know you a little bit. Uh, and one of the ways that I love to do this is, what was your first job? So for me, it was a paper route, but how'd you make your first dollar as a human?
Yeah, my first dollars, I was pumping gas at a Ohio gas station in West Salem, Ohio, back when gas was 66 cents a gallon.
66 cents a gallon. That's awesome.
Yeah, and back then we pumped the gas for you, we cleaned your windshield, and we checked your oil.
I love it. I love it. Cool. Well, what toy or hobby did you have as a child that inspired what you do career wise today?
Toy or hobby that I had as a child that inspired me. I mean, I'm a fanatical baseball fan, and so I would say that baseball, because it's such an analytical game, and even before analytics became a thing with Billy Ball, of course, the Brad Pitt movie, Moneyball. Um, but I've always loved the idea that baseball was a game that was filled with analytics before we even used the term analytics. And as a kid growing up, I collected baseball cards. I still collect them today. You can see a small portion of my collection over my shoulder. And I would sit and I would study and memorize the statistics on the back of baseball cards. And interestingly enough, I found that has actually been a really good skill. It's helped me a lot in what I do today.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, super, super good. Yeah, like the studying of the data points around baseball players kind of gets you in that mode of, how could I use data to manage other things? Super cool. What was your favorite and least favorite course in school?
Oh, well, favorite was history. I've always been fascinated by history, American history in particular. Least favorite, you know, I took some foreign languages in high school, and I wish I would have really given that more time and attention today. But I didn't see the world becoming the melting pot to the extent that it is today. And boy, I wish my Spanish was a lot better than it is.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. Yeah, I took a couple of years of Spanish, and it comes back when you travel, but you have to have that immersion experience, I think. Preferably right around the time you're learning. Immersion really helps. Yeah, that's a good one. What quote from a famous person lives in your mind rent free?
Oh, this is an easy one for me. So Henry Ford said, "Whether you think you can or think you can't, either way, you're right." And I remind myself of that all the time, that if you think you can't, you're right. You can't, because you're in your own head. You've convinced yourself you can't. But if you can, and you convince yourself you can, well, guess what? You can.
Yeah, totally. Limiting beliefs are super powerful, right? Like what we believe internally, we use this iceberg of belief, and it kind of starts with your core values as a person, and And we walk around with like these limiting beliefs that are far more dangerous than anything else we're going to run into in terms of our trajectory. That's good. What do you think the greatest invention or discovery in the past 300 years has been?
Well, my wife and I live in just south of Houston, so for us, it's absolutely air conditioning.
I love it. Yeah, Houston. I'm in Dallas area, and man, it was 115 yesterday, and I think I've just been running from air conditioner to air conditioner for the last few months.
Yeah, when we had, the hurricane came through and it went right over our house, in June, and we lost power for 4 days. And I posted on social media. I know what it was like to live in Texas in 1824.
Right, right. No, totally. I had one of my project managers. He was without power for about a week, and he was basically charging his devices in the car, enjoying the air conditioning. His neighbor was able to get a Generac installed faster than the linemen were able to get everything. I mean, bless their heart, they were working so hard, but they were able to get a Generac installed before the power came back on, and then like it came on the next day. So now they're prepared. All right, well, let's get into some. My favorite topic is innovation, and what tech trends significantly impacted you or your industry, and how has your company responded?
Yeah, so that's an easy one for me, and it's under fire, unfortunately. Congress and our friends up in Washington D.C. are giving this one a really hard look with a lot of misunderstanding, and that's revenue management. Years ago, the travel industry, the airlines started, creating their own revenue management tool for selling their seats based on supply and demand. The hotel industry picked up on that. The multifamily industry has picked up on it. And, no matter how smart somebody thinks they are, this technology does a far better job. And, not only can it see the supply and demand as it's happening today, but it's predictive as well, based on our lease expirations, based on historical data. And for me, that's been a real game changer. Unfortunately, like I said, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what it is. There's a lot of folks in DC who believe that it is nothing more than a price fixing tool, that we control the algorithms, working with our competitors to set the price in the market. Nothing could be further from the truth. There's absolutely no truth to that whatsoever. Um,
So, let me understand. So, this is a software that you can find out the appropriate lease rates of a rental property or probably even like an STR, and figure out like how much should I charge people to stay here, and um, why do you think there's the negative side of that? Just because they feel like you're trying to squeeze as much as you can from the renter, or
yeah, politicians will say that rent is out of control, and I understand why they say that. Everybody is struggling, to pay their bills these days. But what I love about this software is it's able to look at our current supply and demand, and then it's able to look into the future and say, well, gosh, you've got a lot of leases that are expiring in, say, November of 2024. You don't want any more. So it will adjust the price offerings to the prospect to try and steer them away from a lease that expires in November, because that's bad for our business, because historical data says that in November, we're going to have a hard time releasing that apartment if they choose to move out and not renew. And so, then it also looks at the supply and demand within the submarket itself and set those prices accordingly. But yeah, I think they're looking for any angle to try and, get votes and keep themselves elected. We've heard in the last, I guess, a month ago, it was Joe Biden made reference to a national rent control policy. And so, there's definitely a spotlight on rents, and I understand that. And and I think, one of the things I've said for a long time is there's a very fine line between ambitious and being ambitious and being greedy. It's a very fine line. And I say that you cross the line when you hurt other people to enrich yourself. if you're ambitious, you're helping other people. And if you happen to enrich yourself in the process, that's a cherry on top of the ice cream, right? But there's a very fine line, and I see a lot of people cross that line, and I get it. But the truth of the matter is, most owner operators out there, they want to provide a good quality place for people to live at a fair price. But you have to understand the tremendous cost of owning and managing multifamily real estate today, between the huge increases we've seen in tax rates and the massive increases we've seen in property insurance rates. It's choking the life right out of us. And so, we're not as greedy as people think. We're good, hardworking people who, like I say, we want to provide, a good quality place for people to live at a price they can afford.
Well, yeah, and the home is a depreciating asset. It may be taking some time for it to depreciate, but it does need maintenance and upkeep and reinvestment at some stage in the game. Um, so what three technology innovations are you betting on to drive your future business growth?
I'm that rare or that oddball that when I meet with someone who wants to present, new technology to me, a lot of people in my chair, that one of the first questions I ask is, well, who are your current customers? Who are your current clients? They want to know that this is proven, that good reputable companies are using your software, your technology. I never ask that question. And I never ask that question because here's the truth. I hope the answer is no one. You'll be our first. I love always being ahead of everybody else when it comes to new technology. Um, but one of the big ones for us is lead management, where we for years we've relied on our on-site leasing agents to manage their leads when prospects are texting, emailing, calling the property, then working through those leads. Technology does a far better job. At some point, I think it has to be handed off to a human being, and so we try to make sure that it's set up and works that way. But it just does a far better job because a lot of this stuff is basic fundamental information. How much does it cost, what are your fees, that sort of thing. And the technology allows us to answer those questions 24 hours a day. And one of the things I've been saying for years is that if we don't get back to our prospects, I compare that to, you own and operate a restaurant and you have your food supplies delivered by a company like Gordon Food Services. They drop it off outside your back door at 5 o'clock in the morning, and you don't put that food, you don't carry it in and put it in the freezer, the refrigerator, begin to prep it for the day. You let it set outside in the Texas sun all day long. Your restaurant's in trouble. Well, that food supply, those are our prospect leads. And if we don't work them immediately and quickly, they're going to spoil, they're going to go bad. People are looking for a home. They're not going to sit around and wait for us to get back to them 2 or 3 days later. They're going to move on to our competition, and they're going to find somebody who can meet their needs. And so the fact that we can now do this, 24 hours a day, that's a really big help. The other one is, the one job that it's always caused me to be a little concerned, because as much as we want to believe that people are stable, the reality is there are a lot of people out there who are not stable. And dealing with delinquent rent is actually a risky proposition. And so you never know how somebody's going to respond to an eviction notice on their door. Look, you signed a contract. It's never our goal to see anyone become homeless. That's never our goal, to see anyone put out of their home. Our goal is to be able to work with you and see you and your family stay in your home. But you signed a contract, and we have to do our part. You have to do your part, and your part is to pay rent. Our part is to maintain the apartment, ensure that it's habitable, clean, safe, so on and so forth. Um, and so, when leasing agents or property managers or other people on site are posting those, eviction notices on people's doors, making those phone calls, the follow-up emails, sometimes that causes people to fly off the handle. And so now we're able to use AI to do that for us. And not only are we seeing, a positive impact of a higher collection percentage, but I also personally have a better sense of Well, it's not Betty in the office who's calling. Therefore, the resident may not like that, they're having that pressure applied to pay the rent, but they're not upset with Betty because Betty is not the one who's applying the pressure. It's a chat bot. And so that gives me a little bit of comfort in that aspect as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I mean, collections is important, right? We in any business, I know we got to pay our bills, and collections is unfortunately a necessary part of that. Um, but it also, if the person's like, "Hey, I'm just 2 weeks late," cool. The AI bot can collect that and get you the data. And yeah, what an awful job, right? Trying to collect people who are having trouble paying their rent. Hustle them. So just in terms of your employee satisfaction and work-life balance, they probably enjoy coming to work, not having to make those calls or only having to make the more severe ones. That's great. Well, what are some of the more significant gaps between your ambitions and the realities today? Where do you still see there's some room or some opportunity where you wish there was a solution, but it's just a gap still?
Yeah, that's a real easy question. And this is something that's, I don't want to sound cliche, but kept me awake at night for probably 5+ years now. And that is the lack of talent pool on being able to staff our properties from a maintenance standpoint. That's a massive, massive gap. Being finding people who A, want to do that kind of work, and B, have some technical skills. Look, I love guys like Mike Rowe, Dirty Jobs Mike, and he's out there. He's offering scholarships to young people to go to technical schools and learn to be a plumber, an electrician, an HVAC mechanic, and I grew up in a blue collar home. We were farmers in Ohio, but my dad worked outside of the farm as a carpenter for a home builder. And so, I grew up, my dad, taught me those blue collar skills and how to do, your own repairs and that sort of thing. But I think when the gaming industry exploded, kids went from working on things to working on their gaming skills, right? And I get it, and I'm not being critical of that. That's just a shift in society. But that shift has changed the way people look at how they're going to exist as adults, how they're going to pay their bills, and what are the rewarding jobs and viable career fields. And so, nobody goes through high school saying, I'm going to be a maintenance person at an apartment community. Nobody says that. And you're not going to get rich doing it. And so we have a terrible, terrible time staffing those open positions. Our customers feel the pain when we're understaffed because our goal is to respond to a service request within 24 hours of when it comes in. But if we're supposed to have 5 people on the crew and we have 3, that makes it impossible. So there are attempts to find solutions or to introduce solutions through technology, and some of them sound like they have some viability. They may grow some legs and help. I'm just not convinced. And for me, that's a head scratcher. Like, how can we use the way that the world is changing with technology, to solve this problem? One of the solutions that's out there, there's a company that if you become their client, when somebody moves in, or your existing residents, you give them a QR code that they hang on the refrigerator. It's a magnet, and if they have a need after hours, they scan that QR code, and it FaceTimes a retired or a qualified maintenance guy somewhere. He could be in Topeka, Kansas, but he doesn't do this for a living anymore. And now let me see the problem, and he will try to troubleshoot it through the phone, so that you get a quicker response. Maybe the people who are on call don't have to get called out because they were able to resolve it, through the phone. Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, telemedicine for maintenance.
Yeah, no, that's cool. That's cool. I'm definitely in The circles I run in, there's a bunch of these kind of like two-sided marketplaces popping up because they are collecting really the asset here are the folks that have created careers around this. So like one of my buddies is the CEO of Treads. Well, Treads is mobile tire repair, general car maintenance. So it's just dudes that own a van have already decided to go in this. Well, he's networked with all of them, and now you subscribe to Treads and you get a subscription for basically a subscription to take care of your car. You don't have to pay high dollar out of pocket every time you want to do wheels and tires. Um, and this has been happening in the home services industry. Certainly, if you are a handyman, friends with like the House Call Pro guys. So there's SaaS software to help you run your business. What's interesting to see your perspective is that there's still a, a lack of access to reputable handymen. My dad owns a handyman business. He's run that for many years. So it's still really interesting to see that that connection has not quite made it to the property management customer.
Yeah, and so you're Exhibit A, where you this is what your dad does, and that you grew up in that home, and you've gone a completely different route, right? And so that's what we're finding. And so then the challenge we have is that we're when we are able to find people who can and want to do this, then we have to we deal with the language barriers where they don't speak English. And so then you got to navigate through that. And so now technology comes in with go Google Translate or something like that, because it's the only option we have.
Well, what are the biggest challenge you feel to maintaining a competitive edge in your industry?
There's not any real name recognition. So for instance, you want to stay in a nice hotel, you choose a Hilton or a Marriott, you're staying in a nice hotel, right? There's that name recognition. Apartments don't have that. Should, but we don't. There are big, national firms out there that you can find in practically every state. But how do you differentiate yourself, from your competition? What can you do, to stand out, and to build that reputation that makes people say they're reliable. You know, it's a real struggle, and I'm not a marketing person. I haven't figured that one out. But I think that's, I tell the team all the time, everybody's got tech. Everybody's using basically the same tech. And so for me, it's about making sure that we've got an incredible team on site who's passionate, they care, they give their best every day. One of the things I talk about all the time is, for anybody who goes to the gym on a regular basis, you'll have multiple days where you wake up and you just don't have it. You just don't want to go, but you go anyhow, right? And the same thing with your team. I tell the team all the time, this is a grind. We have office hours, but we never close. We're on call 24 hours a day to our customers. And so, I think the thing that's going to set us apart in the markets where we have a presence is, that reliability, that responsiveness, that you go to property A and, people are indifferent. You go to one of our properties and our people are very passionate. Even when they don't feel like it, they give their best. And so got to work really hard to make it worth their time to be that way, right? It's, you can go to KFC and get a chicken sandwich. You can go to Chick-fil-A and get a chicken sandwich, but it's not the same experience. The truth of the matter is, sorry KFC and sorry Chick-fil-A, but the truth of the matter is, they're both handing you a sack of poison in a paper bag. It's fast food, but there's a big difference in the experience. So for me, that's really the focus, is what can we do to create, I'm on the road all the time, and I could rent from any number of rental car businesses, but I choose Enterprise, and I choose them intentionally because the experience is unlike any of their competition.
Customer experience, love it. I mean, that's such a good call out to anyone listening. I mean, And really your competitive edge is also meaningless without that. Because if your people are grouchy, unhappy, don't embrace the hospitality of whatever product or service that you sell, then we'll never even be able to really react or experience your competitive advantage. So that's great. What is uh how do you approach risk when you're implementing something new?
I approach it with the understanding that for every problem that um, the idea, the solution may solve, have a plan for the unexpected, unforeseen challenges. And so I have a high propensity for risk. Even in my personal life, I'm a little bit of a weirdo. People say, "What do you do for fun?" And the answer is, if I could die doing it, I probably want to do it. It's just it's just really weird. I've done a lot of rock climbing and mountain climbing, and I've stood on edges with others that have said, "Man, you got to back away. You're making me nervous." You know, I like to kind of live on the edge, if you will. I find that exhilarating. So I like to take risks, but I understand that I'm working with other people's money. And so I have to be respectful of that. But I go into it with the understanding that yes, this is going to solve a problem, but there's going to come an unexpected problem. I've never launched a technology ever. I've never launched a process or a new idea that didn't come with some unforeseen challenge. And so I go through the whole process, really trying to the best you can prepare for that. General Patton gave one of my favorite quotes. He said, a good plan executed today is better than a perfect plan executed later. And so, we're not going to have all the answers. We're not going to know what some of these challenges are. Let's stop having meetings and talking about it, and you know let's jump out the plane and just have a parachute on your back so that you don't splat into the ground. Right? Something's going to go wrong. So, but you know, I see companies all the time. One of the things I often remind my leadership team is that companies don't fail because they lack a strategy. They fail because they lack a commitment to the strategy. So let's be decisive. Let's make a decision and let's commit to it. And when something goes wrong, because it's going to, we don't suddenly change our commitment. Let's fix what's wrong and maintain our commitment to the strategy that we've married ourselves to.
Yeah, and a lot of times the assumption of risk. I'm going tandem skydiving for my first time on Friday. Might be my first jump out of a perfectly good airplane. And as I think about the moment of jumping out or the moment of landing, then yes, there's some fear and trepidation of those specific moments. But as I zoom out to the experience of like, man, it's going to be so exciting to go with my friends to get some orientation and to go through the experience and jump, and then we get to go to dinner. As I zoom out even a little bit, really those specific fear of those moments or what's the worst that could happen really blend away. And I find that when you're trying to implement these big changes, it's really the camaraderie and the strength that you're building with your team, that kind of it's almost like the risk is just a counterbalance to the muscle of change. And so you're getting better at making changes with your team. And so, yeah, there are risky things, but I love what you said there about the commitment to it is really what it's all about. Because if your team is good at change, there's nothing that can stop your team.
Yeah, that's right. One of the things my team here is going to say all the time is that fear is not our friend. And so, fear keeps you from seeing the beauty that's on the other side. And so, you could go up on that plane and say, "Man, I'm sorry, I can't do it." And you ride the plane back. Years ago, I was at a tech conference out in Santa Barbara, California. I'm terrified of drowning. Just when I was 11 years old, my brother took me fishing on our uncle's lake. my brother was 5 years older than me and much bigger than me. He was 6 feet tall and probably 175 pounds in the sixth grade. He was a beast. He was a tree trunk as a kid. So we paddle out to the middle of the lake. We're fishing, and all of a sudden, my brother grabs me, throws me into the lake. I couldn't swim, and he knew that. Threw me into the lake and quickly paddled away, laughing. I had two choices in that moment. I could give up and drown, or I could fight like crazy and get to the shore. Um, I've never forgiven my brother. To this day, I don't speak to him. No, I'm kidding. I do. But that instilled in me this terrible fear of drowning. So years ago, I'm at a tech conference out in Santa Barbara, and the founder of this company said, "Hey, when you leaving? I'm here for a couple of days. What are you doing tomorrow?" I just was going to take in the sights as my first time ever to Santa Barbara, and he said, "Let me come by and pick you up. I've got something special planned." He picks me up. We're going paddle boarding. I'd never been paddle boarding. We're going paddle boarding out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And every part of me said, "Don't do this. Don't do this. You're going to drown. Don't do this." And I just kept reminding myself, fear is not your friend. And I'm going to tell you, it was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life to be, several hundred yards out into the Pacific Ocean, learning the paddle board. At one point, we both just sat on our boards and we just sat out there. It was the most beautiful, calm day. It was just like the water was like glass. And we just sat out there for probably 45 minutes to an hour, just talking about life. And I'll never forget that experience. Fear is not your friend. On the other side of fear is beauty.
That's so good. And since you told such an amazing story, a couple weeks ago we did a guys trip. Me and a small group of guys. There were six of us, and we went and hiked to 14er, and we got right to the summit, and the scramble was a little more significant than what we had expected. No real risk. It was a difficult class two. Just means there's no rocks that are going to fall on your head. You don't need a helmet. You don't need any climbing apparatus. You're just going to need to use at least 3 points of contact at all times, or you could fall and hurt yourself. And one of our buddies got amygdala hijacked with some fear of heights that we didn't really know, and I don't think he expected it to show up at that particular time. But it was no joke, about 100 feet from the summit, and there was no way we were going to let him bow out of just accomplishing the next 100 feet of climbing, next 200 feet of climbing, to get to the summit and experience what we had worked so hard. We had climbed 4,500 feet of elevation. It's a pretty grueling hike. We were sitting at basically the tippy top of Mount Harvard, and we're like, "Nope, you're doing it." And we were able to coach him over some pretty paralyzing fear and get him to the summit. And of course, he was super appreciative that we wouldn't let it slide, right? All that work just to that last little bit. So yeah, fear is not your friend. I love it. Tell me a little bit about how you plan. What advice can you share for connecting technology roadmaps, or just roadmaps in general, with your overall business strategy?
Yeah, I think it's important to make sure that you're having the right conversations with the right people. One of the things in our industry, I constantly remind my leadership team is that whatever decision we make, we're not the ones who have to live with it. We're not the ones who have to make it work. So let's do a little bit of due diligence. Let's not prolong this to a level of nauseum. But I want to make sure that we are talking to the right people so that we're identifying what problem are we trying to solve. And I ask that question constantly when we have these meetings is, what's the problem we're trying to solve? Make sure that everybody's in agreement on what problem we're trying to solve. And then we can move on to, okay, how will this solve it? And sometimes the answer is it won't. So then we know we can push that one off to the side and move on to maybe a different solution. But I think for me, that's, the mistake I see a lot of leaders make is that, look, I've been around for a long time. I know what I'm doing. I've reached this level because I have a proven track record, and therefore nobody's more qualified to make the decision than me. Okay, I get that. I'm sitting in my office, not seeing the struggles of the person out in the field, like, man, this doesn't work. This is, and so, I want to make sure that I've identified who are the right people to talk to bring in on this, and hear their opinions on it, what struggles they're having, and then we're able to make a better informed decision, and they know it's coming. I see that as happen all the time too, where there's, the first time people find out there's a change coming is when it's too late. Hey, as of tomorrow, we're doing ABC, and they had no idea this was coming. And you talked about, strengthening that muscle, when it comes to embracing change, and you don't give people a lot of time to prepare for it. And I think that's a mistake a lot of leaders make.
Hmm. Yeah, that's so good. I see that a lot with marketing, just the risk around marketing spending. So I did some marketing at some point in some time, and now I just see a lot of leaders convince themselves that their particular batch of users are the hardest to communicate to. They just don't seem to understand, and it seems like this meaning that we've interpreted from the different marketing that we've tried. And so I just see a lot of that kind of blocked thinking, that really blocks their whole marketing roadmap and how they're going to tie their business strategy. And I think it just becomes this underlying belief that my users are they're the hardest to get to adopt. And then when the reality is that, like, it's our responsibility to be understood. And if you have real value and you communicate it properly, there are more than enough customers to be successful. There's kind of this abundance mindset, that if you communicate properly to a customer, if you said, hey, you have $1, I'll give you 5, nobody is not going to accept that value proposition. But we have to work really hard on how to craft that message. And oftentimes our products require education, so we have to start with like problem based statements. And so yeah, I see that cruft, that mental cruft, a lot on the marketing side. Where I would love to take this is, what lessons have you learned from any initiative, doesn't have to be a tech initiative, but from an initiative that failed to deliver expected value?
Well, the first lesson I learned, and I really try to live by this now, is I remind myself constantly when we're looking at any kind of change, whether it's new technology, a new process, or even purchasing a new asset. I constantly remind myself throughout the entire process that my title and position doesn't make me right. I'm as qualified, as capable of being wrong as the next person. Um, you know, I so taking that mindset, I think makes it easy for me to be more open to listening to what other people are saying, and what they're feeling. And years ago, I made a marketing decision that I thought was brilliant. Shared it with the team. Everybody nodded their head in agreement. We launched it, and it was an epic failure, a tremendous failure, because I didn't do my research. I didn't dig in and really know the facts. I didn't know the market data as well as I thought I did, and we had to live with that decision for 6 months before we could get out of it and shift to something that actually would work. And when it happened, I'll never forget. I stood in front of the team, and I acknowledged my mistake, and basically everybody said, we knew this was a terrible idea. And that was a real eye-opening moment for me.
I told you, yeah, I could have told you so, but I didn't.
Yeah, but they didn't. And so rather than get upset that they didn't, I really went home that night and I said, what am I doing that made them feel like they couldn't tell me this was a bad idea? How do I change that dynamic so it never happens again? And so I've really tried to lead with a better level of humility, if you will, or approachability, vulnerability, whatever ability word you want to use, so that people understand I mean it when I say my title and position doesn't make me right. So if I'm not right, tell me, because I lead with this real strong conviction that we win together, we lose together. And even though I made that decision, we all lost because of that decision. We all suffered, as a result of it. So, let's embrace that mentality that we win together, we lose together. When we make a good decision and it works out well, we all win. It's better for all of us, our customers, our entire team, our investors. And when we don't, we all lose. Our customers lose, our associates lose, our investors lose. So, I try to make sure that everybody understands that, and we operate on a daily basis with that belief that we win together, we lose together, and that my title position doesn't make me right.
Yeah, how do you counter that to what I find is that I'm taking folks and I'm pushing them through their comfort zone into a growth zone. They'll butt up against a stress zone or a place where, hey, the wheels are coming off because I'm performing, and then they'll kind of pull back into their performance zone. But how do you caveat that? Because I find sometimes folks will disagree because it's pushing into the growth zone. It's taking them outside of their comfort zone. So how do you know where to listen and where to push?
Yeah, because I think that's really important. And the one thing that I'm very aware of is that when I walk into a room or I show up at a property, simply because I carry the title of CEO, that alone, regardless of who I am and how I view myself, that title alone can put people on edge. And so I try to be really aware of that. But you're right. Why is this person resisting? Why are they pushing back? Is it because they truly don't believe this is a good idea? Is it because it's making them uncomfortable? What I found is that if you work really hard to elevate relationships, then that allows you to then elevate the perspective. But you can't elevate the perspective until you've elevated the relationship. And so what I try to do is make sure that the relationship is elevated to the point where we can have a candid, open conversation about it to change their perspective.
Mm, yeah, no, that's great. Just the openness, the transparency, and making sure that it's a two-way street. Love it.
Yeah, because that's really the battle that's going on, is that, our perspective is our perspective. We only know what we know. And so how do you get that? How do you elevate that? And I found that when you elevate the relationship, and that means that there's trust, and when I sit across from you, if you trust that I have your best intentions, what's best for you, at the heart of what I'm doing, um, and that trust is truly thriving in that relationship, it's easier to get you to take that next step up that tree, even though it's paralyzing because of your fear of heights. Like with your friend ultimately, continued the journey because he trusted you guys weren't going to let anything bad happen to him, right? He didn't want to do it, but the trust was stronger than the fear, and that's an elevated relationship. And because that relationship was elevated, the perspective was able to be elevated.
Yeah, I love that idea of elevated relationships. Are there any other ways that you cultivate culture, in like a culture of innovation inside your organization?
Yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind that if you're really trying to get people to buy in, try things differently, step out of their comfort zone, um, you've got to make sure that you're communicating with them where they are, that you understand their pain points, you understand their struggles. One of the things I do, not every Friday, but most every Friday, is I write a message to the entire organization, and it's called Friday's Feast. And Friday's Feast means that, I think it's important to feed the soul, to feed the mind, feed the emotions as much as it is to feed the body. And so my Friday's Feast are original messages written by me to the team to really identify how they might be. And I do it on Friday in particular, and I try to do it early in the day. I don't want to do it late in the day, as people are thinking about wrapping up and starting their weekend. So I try to get to it in the morning. But I do it so that, as they are finishing a week where maybe they've been beat up, it's been a tough week, they've struggled with the weather, the heat. We have properties up in the Chicago area. They've been pushing and shoveling snow all week, and they're worn out, they're exhausted, and it's just an inspirational message. It's a win one for the Gipper speech, if you will, because I think that's important. And I think leaders sometimes forget the fact that the team needs to be picked up. I try to remember that it's not my job to motivate. I think motivation is very personal. Everybody has their own reason why they do what they do, and motivation can be good or bad. If somebody hurts somebody's child and they want to kill that person, their motivation, that's their motivation. But it's bad, but it's their motivation, right? And so I don't try to motivate. Instead, what I try to do is inspire. And when people say, "Well, what does that mean?" And inspiration is something that you hear or see that makes you feel. And so I intentionally write these messages on Friday, and it has one purpose: to make them feel something, make them feel appreciated, respected, seen, heard, safe. So then they can go into the weekend saying, "Golly, my job is hard, but I love the people I work for." So they come back in Monday morning ready to fight that fight again and get beat up again for the next 5 days. And then, I give them the Friday's feast again, the following Friday.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, what lesson or experience would you share with people beginning their career journey, or maybe beginning their digital transformation?
So for me, I'm a veteran. I served the United States Air Force. And so I've got the luxury, if you will, the benefit of being thrown into a world that I knew nothing about, 1,000 miles from home, surrounded by complete strangers. And what I gained from that has helped me tremendously. And that is, I was suddenly exposed to people who were very different from me. Growing up on a very isolated farm in the middle of Ohio, most of the farms around our farm were Amish. So it was a very, very sheltered, very simple lifestyle. And all of a sudden, I'm in San Antonio, Texas, around people whose skin color was completely different from anyone I went to school with. And they spoke languages that, I mean, we were as single as you could be in terms of the demographics of where I grew up. And so I would say that don't be afraid of reaching out to people who are very different from you. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but learn something from them. 7 nights a week, our dinner table was meat and potatoes. And suddenly I'm stationed in Japan, and there's fish on the table that's never been cooked. And every part of me is like, ooh, gross, man. Some of the best food ever, right? I mean, just like, and my wife loves sushi, and I joke with her. She's like, "Why don't you eat sushi with me?" I'm like, I was single when I was over there. I'm like, well, I lived in Japan. I'm a sushi snob. But this stuff we have in this country, doesn't cut the. But my point is, don't be afraid of connecting with people who are very different, because those contrasts are some of the greatest learning opportunities, good or bad, but they're some of the greatest learning opportunities. So be willing to explore, learn from anyone that you can. I think that the thing that you'll learn as you become a CEO is that your peer group, when you first start out, your peer group's really big, right? When you're working the floor, there are hundreds or thousands in the organization in your level. But as you move up the ladder, your peer group gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And that creates a real challenge. And that challenge is, Ken Blanchard talks about, being a rain barrel. And, it's important as a CEO that, in our role, people are constantly drawing water from our barrel. And if we're not careful, what happens to our barrel? It runs dry. So, when you're starting out, it's easy to find people who can fill your barrel. But as you become, a C-suite executive, it becomes more challenging to find people who can fill your barrel. So find people who will fill your barrel. That's really important.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I'm a big I have a couple mastermind groups that I'm a part of for that very reason, and I think mastermind groups can be a huge asset. Um, cool. Well, if people like what you've had to share today, how should they connect with you?
So there's a couple of ways. I actually, in addition to running my own, multifamily company, I also do a lot of speaking, around the country. So I have a website. It's BillNyeApartmentGuy.com. Got to play on the guy thing, right? When your name is Bill Nye, you're always Bill Nye the something guy, right? And so, so they can find me at, so there's no the in it. It's just BillNyeApartmentGuy.com. That's the easiest way to find me.
Great. Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to get that in the show notes, and I appreciate you being here with us today.
Well, thanks for having me. I've enjoyed this conversation.